Hello and welcome to Finextra TV. My name is Alex Lipich. You join us here on UK Fintech Week at the IFGS 2024 in London. And I'm more than delighted to be joined by Ezechi Britton MBE, CEO of the Centre for Finance, Innovation and Technology. Ez, if you don't mind me calling you Ez.
Absolutely.
Lovely to have you. Thank you for joining us. Earlier this year, CFIT released a report which highlighted the benefits of open finance. Would you be kind enough to share the key takeaways of that report with us?
Oh, absolutely, and it's a real pleasure to be with you today, Alex. We had a number of key takeaways. Ultimately, the first one was significant increase in the amount of lending to SMEs. What we found was that by increasing the amount of information, the data sets that we have access to, whether it's HMRC, Companies House, etc., those SME borrowers that would typically go for a manual underwriting decision, we could have lent to substantially more. We could have actually seen an increase of over 25% to those borrowers who would have potentially not got a loan at all. So what you see there is a massive increase in the amount of lending that could have been made to UK SMEs that make up 5.5 million of those businesses in the UK, which has an incredible impact on the UK. We also saw that from the consumer side, by working with Citizens Advice, debt advice charities could have supported an extra 40% of customers year on year. So working with Citizens Advice, we saw that they typically work with something like 350,000 people a year, and yet 70% of their calls go unanswered because the amount of time it takes for individuals to go through that process. And that key thing that they have to do is answer that 600 data point question around their finances at the beginning. So by automating that process, Citizens Advice found they could have actually supported an extra 150,000 customers a year, over 1 million people over the next decade, which is a significant increase in the amount of people they could have supported. When we look at the wider economy, open finance and personal data portability could have been worth an additional 30.5 billion to the UK economy. We also saw that actually by bringing everyone together, bringing the different key industrial players, the regulators, the policymakers, the academics to solve these problems, we were able to really build momentum and make a change. By being that change maker, we could see a real difference. And then finally, we saw the importance of simplification and looking at the consent journey for consumers and how important it is that we empower the consumer when it comes to the protection and the usage of their information.
Very insightful. And if we take a step back for a second, look at the kind of overall picture, what do you think needs to be done specifically to implement change in your view?
So we set out 6 key recommendations on the back of the work that we did across our coalition. Number one, we wanted to see that, well, number 1 and 2 ultimately is wanted to see those proof of concepts taken forwards. Because firstly, whilst we did that work, we actually built working models, prototypes, dashboards around what that data sharing could look like, whether it was getting more information to the credit decisioning process, whether it was automating that standard financial statement. So recommendation 1, we want to see Citizens Advice, we want to see our coalition partners taking that initiative forward, and we're really pleased to announce that that is actually going to be happening. Number 2, it was about having more of those lenders and those banks trying and working on that exact same activity that we ran with HSBC. What is the impact that having this additional data has on your credit decisioning process? What will it do in terms of optimization and lending throughput? Recommendation 3, we want to see a working group on commercial models.
Sure.
Recommendation 4, there needs to be an accountable body taking open finance forwards. Recommendation 5 is to be a working group on consent and ensuring that when we have a look at that one-to-many data set model, that the consumer consent is at the heart of everything that takes place. And ultimately, recommendation 6, a task force on data set prioritization for open finance.
Now you've touched on this already, but kind of looking forward as best we can into the future, how do you think that open finance will change fintech in the UK specifically?
Well, it's really about greater personalization and customization of options for both consumers and SMEs, about creating better outcomes that better reflect their actual circumstances. And it's hard to really imagine what those could be. There's so many different potentials.
Yeah.
But when we think about consumer duty, for example, making sure that consumers get the best loan for them, how do you do that unless you know more about them? When we look at businesses trying to get access to credit, if you look at SMEs, those 5.5 million that I mentioned earlier, 50% are permanent non-borrowers. How do we ensure that they know what the best products for them are unless we're able to bring that data into the process? Ultimately though, when we look at what's happening and where the future is, we've just had it announced just yesterday, the CFIT task force on open finance dataset prioritization. So we will be working with the coalition partners as part of this task force to take that work forwards over the next few months, to be able to make recommendations back to Treasury around dataset and API prioritization around the potential commercial working models in order to set up the work streams that are needed for the future entity to take them forwards so that we can get to that smart data future.
As I'm going to let you go, but thank you so much for such an interesting insight. It'll be so good to see how things develop over the weeks and months to come, but thank you for your time, we do appreciate it.
It's been my absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ez.